Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It's time for a new video today where I'm going to share the process of how I read the French language books. You might use the same process or you might have a different process, but I thought I would share a different kind of video today, given that as well as reading books in the English language, I do like reading books in other languages. And the other two languages that I know are French and Greek. Now, Greek is something that I have picked up through my background and I'm only just getting back into in my later years because I feel privileged that I have been able to learn this language through my own culture and through my own upbringing. But French, I picked French up simply because in high school I failed it. And during the COVID lockdowns, I thought it was time to revisit and look at the various things in my life that I had failed and revisit those, rewrite that failure from many years ago. And I'm so glad I did because it provided me a mindset break during COVID to be able to focus my attention and my learning to this lovely language. Given that I also love the French culture, I also love French history, I love French foods, so I thought it would be the height of my respect to that country and respect to that language by learning their language, and I'm so glad I did. So what I'd like to do today is show you how I read French language books, in particular some novels, and I'll show you the tools that I use, I'll show you the books that I'm reading, I'll show you my process. But I have to put a disclaimer here to say that my process is not the right way for you. It is the right way for me, but it might not be the right way for you. And I came across this process simply through trial and error, and also simply through my preferences with what I like to use when I'm learning. I'm pretty much someone who likes a lot of color, who likes repetition, who likes application, who likes feedback when I'm learning. You're going to see that I don't always use online tools except for a translating app, which I'll go through. But the rest of the time you'll see that my learning is actually quite tactile. I love things near me, I love things color, I love pens, paper and notebooks, and I need to write things down. But this might not be how you prefer to learn. And what I do encourage you to do is to experiment and find the process and find the system that works for you, because I know that we are living in a wonderful time when it comes to lifelong learning and having access at our fingertips, both online and offline, resources, tools, apps, websites, videos, you name it, there is a plethora of stuff out there. Ultimately, it's up to us to try and find the best fit when it comes to our language learning, but streamlining that myriad of tools and resources to just a few things that we can always have on hand, that we can use, that are tried and tested, and that enable us to get that feedback that we need, and then to contextualize and apply what we're learning in our books through in our everyday language. My tools of the trade when it comes to reading books, and that I have near me all the time, are always some coloured post-it stick-it notes, some coloured texters, simply because I love texter pens, but you don't have to use colour if you don't want to. Me, I love colour. I love the idea of being able to see different colors on the page, and somehow I remember it more when I use color. But you can actually use your pens as well. It doesn't really matter. The other thing I do use quite a lot of are post-it notes, and I always have some post-it notes in every room of the house because I always take my notes and insert them in books. And of course I've got my trusty notebook where I will write things down, and similarly my French notebooks where I also transcribe what I have been reading into these notebooks. So you can see that a lot of the stuff is quite hydraulic. I use a lot of tactile type of materials. Now I know a lot of these you can also put online. You can use online notebooks, you can use online apps to be able to capture things. You can even use your voice. You can use different apps to be able to capture this. But for me, I'm trying to minimize the screen time, and I'm trying to incorporate ways of being able to remember what I'm reading, and the way I do that is by physically writing what I read down on paper and putting my own context to it. It doesn't really matter what books you read. However, and in my own experience, I have found that books of a classic nature in your language present some kind of challenges sometimes. And I can't speak for all the languages. I know for Greek and also for French. When you're reading classic books, even though it is fantastic that you can read classic books, there are some grammatical changes and some tenses that you might not see in everyday language. And similarly, there might be dialogue that is old-fashioned or might be a little bit different, a little bit harder to understand. But that's not to say you shouldn't be reading French classic books. The type of books that I have been trying to get into slowly but surely are books of a genre that I wouldn't normally read in English. And these are the general literature, popular literature in French. Now, in English, you would see that my YouTube channel, I usually review books of modern literature. I review classics as well for English. But for French, because I find it a little bit hard, I prefer to read French books that are current. You could even call them chick lit, you can call them just the current genre, because they present the language as it is on the street, and also they write in short sentences and the chapters are shorter. I find that my level, which is about a B level, intermediate B level, I guess, I haven't had it formally checked, I can read the book a lot easier than I can, say, a classical book, simply because the normal everyday language that I'm learning in French classes are the typical way that it is written nowadays. So I have been reading books that are quite generic, I guess, from authors that you might recognize, like Grimaldi and also Valerie Perrin, who I'm reading currently at the moment. I look through the back, and if they sound very interesting of sorts, I will buy the book. Now, the books I have bought simply because I need to have the physical books, because I write in them. The expectation is that when you get a language book that you want to read in your language, expect that it's going to be written in. Expect to have marginalia in. So if you're someone who prefers not to write in their books, then I would suggest you have an alternative method through using post-it notes or doing some other way. But for my process, I really need to write in the books. I have started a collection of current books that are currently on the shelves back in France, and I read them. I really love these Le Livre de Poche, and you can get the story, and sometimes they even have these little bookmarks in them that I use, and they're very easy to read because they're all a small size. The highlighters. Highlighters are a big thing because there is a special way that I read. So let's talk about that now. When I read a book, I leave the book in places that I can easily get to it. So for example, I'll leave it at the kitchen table. So in the morning when I'm having my breakfast and a cup of coffee or my cereal, it is there with my highlighter with some post-it notes, my sticky notes, and I would read a page or two. I read it first through skimming it over. I don't read it out loud, but I read it in my head. And then I go through and read it a second time. But the second time I'll start to underline the words that I don't understand. And similarly, also the grammatical structures that I don't understand. And also any phrases that don't seem to make sense to me, but could be the slang or could be just the normal everyday language that they use. When I highlight the word, that means I don't understand it. It means I need to further investigate where it comes from, what it means, and what it means in the context of the story. And I will do this a few pages every day. So I don't really go in depth and read to the extent that I do in English and read wads of text, because when you're learning a language and you're reading the language, expect that you're going to take a longer time in digesting the information. Like this book took me at least a few months to read. I basically experienced the book because every page I read a few times, every page I pondered over difficult words, every page I had words to look up in the dictionary and also scribe. Now you can see on every page how I've highlighted some of the words. And across on the top of them as well, I'll also write what those words mean. So there is the translation of them. When I translate them, that's when I read it again and I get a completely new feel for what the text is about. At the end of each chapter, I go back through these words and I need to refresh my memory. So then what I do there is, that's when my trusty notebook comes out. I actually transcribe all of those words into a notebook, and I use different colors for the English version and for the French. Out of all these words, they are also transcribed back into a notebook. Process of me writing these words down means I will remember it further, because not only do I read it, not only then do I translate it, not only then do I transcribe it, but then there is a fourth element where I go through all my words and I highlight at least 3 or 4 of those words that I'm going to use in my conversation in French classes. So that way I am applying the words that I saw in here and applying it and contextualizing it to a dialogue that I might have with my teacher that week or with my language learning partners that week. So I'm using that word that I read in the book into language, which further reinforces that word into my head. Some weeks later and some months later, I also revisit the notebook and I quickly scan through those words again just to memorize and recall what those words are. So these are the ways that I am able to remember, recall, apply, contextualize, and then say it out loud in real life situations. Another way of being able to remember what I read is recall how I said that when you read a French language book, you are having an experience with it, because it's not like reading in your first language where you get involved in the story, you get involved in the flow, you get involved in the characters. At an intermediate level, the way I'm finding I'm reading books is that it is a bit of a struggle to get into the flow and the characters, simply because you're doing something else. Your brain is also translating, your brain is also trying to think of the grammar structures. Your brain is also trying to remember what you read in the previous pages. So it's a little bit slow compared to reading in English in your normal language. And so what happens is sometimes I find I lose thread of the story. I lose the flow. I can't recall what happened in the previous chapter, what happened in the previous pages, simply because my focus had been only on that page or on that paragraph. What I do is something else, something that reinforces that memory and helps me recall the story, and that is using the post-it notes. At the end of every chapter or so, I will summarize in English what that chapter was about. So I would read it, I would write it down, and then when I come back to it, say the next day, if I'm trying to recall what I'd read, I simply go into it and read the English version, and that triggers, that's what that story was about. So I don't have to reread it in French. And as you can see, I have post-it notes on not every page, but every chapter or so. And this helps me recall the story because it takes time and you forget the story and forget what you've read in the past. I find at the end of the few months of reading the book, I've had an experience with the book. I started to, for this one in particular, I found that I started getting into the storyline because a lot of the words were repeating through other chapters and I didn't need to translate those, so I was saving a lot more time. But I found that this process worked for me when I started to shed a tear over a dialogue of the two characters. And these tears, well, they were enlightening for me because I thought to myself, I'm actually having an emotional reaction of a story that I'm reading in another language, my third language, a language that I have picked up in the last few years. And so I felt that I had achieved something at that point where emotionally the story moved me, even though it was not in my own language. So as you can see, I'm doing exactly the same thing with my current book, which is Les Oubliés du Dimanche by Valérie Perrin. I'm currently still on page 54. I have been writing all over the book, and I have these post-it notes now that I've been trying. Have you seen these? They're little clear post-it notes. I don't like them. I don't like them simply because they're too plasticky, and I thought that I could use a pen and then be able to read it, but it's not as clear as the normal post-it notes. Hopefully I have given you some ideas of how to read your books in your own language that you are learning. Please let me know if you have found this helpful. Please also let me know how you are doing your process, and in particular, if you're doing it in other ways, in using online tools, then I'd be interested to find out. Let's talk about what online tools I'm using for translating. Now, I know in this channel, I have often told you that I don't use any artificial intelligence to create these videos, to edit these videos, to come up with ideas for videos. I use none of that. I know many people do. I know artificial intelligence also helps, and I know some of the platforms out there because I have dabbled in them, but I prefer what you see is what you get on this channel. I have nothing to sell. I don't have any products. There is no business interest in it for me. Personally, I don't use AI when I create these videos, but I use AI for language learning because admittedly it does help. The app that I'm using for translating is just a basic version of Deepl, and you might have heard of Deepl. Deepl is similar to Google Translate. It has an option where you can take photos and it can transcribe the entire page into your language. It has a microphone, you could save files, and there's a ton of languages here. There's a translator, you can even add text and correct mistakes, you can talk to it. It is a fantastic app. So Deepl is the app that I use, but what I do is rather than scan the entire page, which is quite easy to do, and then you're reading it in English, which is pointless really for language learning, I actually type in the word into Deepl and then translate it from there. Sometimes if it is particularly hard going, if I'm reading classics, I can actually use the app to translate the page. But ultimately, I think to myself, I'm actually doing myself a disservice, because by doing that, when it translates it, I find that it translates it not literally. It would translate it in how it would be interpreted in English. And sometimes I actually prefer to have the literal translation, so my mind can see how the French actually phrase a sentence as opposed to how it is translated into English. It's your call on how you want to do it, but ultimately I find I want to know how the French would say a particular phrase as opposed to what an AI app would translate into English and decipher it. I want to do the deciphering. That's all for now. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Bye for now.